my friends are simps.
For my latest circuit bending project, I have been working on a video color processor, specifically one called the VCC3010 from Tech. They're an old company that used to make like consumer kind of video production units back in the 90s, I think it was. Now, I've been looking for a colorizer for a wee while. I've done some other videos, circuit bending a video mixer and also a video titler, but a colorizer is slightly different because even though you kind of get controls over the picture in other kind of mixers, for example, the kind of video enhancement circuits you find where you can change the contrast and detail and things, video colorizers or color processors allow you to change the individual RGB channels. I can never say that for some reason. But anyway, you get control over them, and that means by its nature, if you're going to circuit bend something like that, you can get some pretty cool, wild, colourful effects, and that's the kind of thing I'm really interested in. Now, a lot of the video color processing units that you find have got AC power. They're also very expensive, or at least they're too expensive for me to just start opening up and mucking about with. Although, to be fair, I did modify my Behringer RD6, which probably cost a wee bit more. But anyway, they usually cost about £90 or something. You do see people that do really cool modifications with them. But this one in particular I found really interesting because it's DC powered. It's 15 volts DC, which means it's not got AC power running into the device itself. Now, I've already started bending this thing. I haven't finished it yet. I'm doing the video in the middle of the bend, which I guess is always risky, but I'll show you what I've done so far and kind of what the differences are between the other kind of devices that I've bent, and you can get an idea of how they're going. So over here on the top, you can see one of these units that I've got in my video processing rig already. I actually bought this one with the intention of circuit bending it, but then I discovered that it was actually very useful on its own unbent, and I'll talk about that in a different video, but I decided not to circuit bend this one, and then I picked up a second one with the explicit purpose of being able to bend it. But you can see on here we have detail, brightness, contrast, color, which is saturation, then the individual channels. We've got a fader, which I don't use very often. We can also do split screen. We've got the color correct on or off, so whether or not you're going to actually use the color processing part. Then there's a process picture button, which enables the kind of detail, contrast, and all that kind of stuff. Then you can invert the picture, and it's got 4 different inputs. It's both audio and video. Now, the audio circuit is separate from the video circuit. I've taken it out, and you can see that here. It's literally just a kind of switcher additional PCB that sits on top, but the actual device itself is down here. Now you can see that I've pulled the guts out of this one already and I've been working on it. This is the top. It's fairly easy to disassemble these actually, because as you can see, you can leave the knobs on the front, which is good because it means you can adjust these as you go and kind of see what the effects are. Now, the big problem I had with this one is if I flip it over, the bottom of the PCB is actually on the bottom of the case, and that's fine because you can get access to it fairly easily and, you know, test out your bends and things. However, the problem I ran into is that with the case, it fits very tightly, and that means that you can't get the cables to actually go onto the top of the PCB so that you can get them onto the top of the case where your knobs and things will be. So the solution I kind of landed upon was there are a few points in the PCB that are holes. They didn't appear to be screw holes or anything like that, or at least I hope they aren't, because if so, there's going to be some trouble when I try to put this together. However, that wasn't really enough space, especially with the kind of gauge of wire that I like to use on these. So I decided to kind of do something a bit risky, and in a moment of madness I drilled a few extra holes in the PCB, and you can see up the top here I found a couple of places that thankfully didn't have any traces. Now that means the bottom of the PCB is all nice and relatively, you know, compact or whatever, and the top here, oh shit, the top here is kind of this currently it's a big fucking rat's nest. So the next steps that I have to take are to drill the holes in the top of the case and then try and fit everything together and test it all out. The kind of issue with using a unit like this where everything is on the top of the case is that you have to kind of use really extra long wire so that you can kind of work on it with the case attached, if that makes sense. So that's a wee bit trickier than I've had to deal with before. But I'm going to make a bit more of an effort in terms of lining all the knobs up and stuff, because there is quite a lot of room on the top of the case. Now I do have to decide whether or not I'm going to leave this audio board in there. It would be nice if I could keep the actual processing unit completely functional and just add on the different knobs. There should be enough space to do that. However, I suspect that maybe with all the wires, because I've put in quite a lot of modifications, then I might have to remove this. But if that is the case, then I'll have to work out something, because I don't want to leave holes in the front. In terms of finding the actual solder points and everything on this, it's basically almost exactly the same process as I've used before with my other circuit bending projects. And if you haven't gone and watched those videos, then you should if you're interested, because I kind of explained the way I do things. I'm not going to repeat all of that here because it would be kind of redundant. However, the things that were a wee bit different with this are that the potentiometer values with this particular device were higher than the other devices I've used. So in the past I found that I was using 500 ohm pots and 1k at a push, but with this there was a few places that I was actually using 100k potentiometers, which was pretty crazy, but that was the kind of the best value that I could find in order to kind of keep the original picture if I turned it all the way off, but also in order to kind of get a good range of effect in there. With this one in particular, I was really not being very careful at all. I definitely didn't look up any of the chips, and I honestly wasn't even avoiding the top and bottom pins like I would normally do to avoid kind of the power issues. But it seems to have survived so far, so hopefully once I do all the drilling, it will actually function nicely, but I guess we'll see how it goes. The drilling process went relatively smoothly, as you might be able to tell, or maybe not. I say relatively smoothly because the whole case part of things is not something I'm particularly good at. I can never really line things up properly. But to be honest, I've made more of an effort this time. Usually I just kind of drill with gay abandon and kind of squeeze everything in however I can. I've been more interested in the electronic side. However, even despite the fact that I kind of measured everything out before, well, to some kind of degree, I did measure the place where the audio board sat, because my idea was that I could leave the audio PCB in there and I would kind of work around things. However, I did manage to cock things up even with all of my careful measurements, because I realised that when I kind of turned the case around, that I had somehow managed to drill it the wrong way round, and so I had drilled holes for the potentiometers right where this actually is meant to go, which is not very good. What I think I'm going to do is I will probably chop this bit off so that the switches are still available in the front of the case and there aren't holes. That way it'll kind of look a wee bit better. It is a bit of a shame because it does mean the audio switching won't work anymore. However, I don't use the audio part of this, but it would have been nice to have it in there. And I guess that's kind of a lesson learned for future. And this, I would say, is why this channel is good. You don't get this kind of raw honesty in any other channel. They would have just said, oh well, you know what, I actually decided that it made more sense to focus on the video and give more room for the wires, etc., because it'll be quite hard to... No, I genuinely just cocked this up, so yes. Now the hardest bit I think will be actually getting the case back together, because no doubt I'll have to resolder some things because it's a bit of a mess at the moment. Anyway, I'm going to try that now and see how that goes, so bear with me. Alrighty, this is the back of the PCB. This is the bottom part, which will go underneath, if that makes sense. It's on the bottom of the case. So I would like to be able to set up the top of the case without having to put the bottom on first, because that way it means I can then go back and fix any issues with the soldering that may well come up as I'm kind of squeezing everything together. It also means I might hot glue everything in once I'm done, just to give it a wee bit of security, but I guess we can see. Now the issue here is this kind of massive rat's nest of cables, because I don't really know where I'm going to start. So I guess the first thing I have to do, shit, look, already got a problem. Okay, I'll have to figure out where that's come from. Okay, so it's this. Right, I need to fix that one. But, oh Christ. Right, so I need to untangle things first and then kind of get them roughly, you know, sitting free so I can move things around and put them in place without too much trouble. So that's the first step, I guess. There's probably people watching these videos that actually do proper circuit bending things, and they're like, why the fuck did you... I guess it would also help if I had some kind of rhyme or reason for the colours of these cables, but again, I do not. Okay, so... Alright, that looks kind of acceptable. One thing that's worth saying while I'm doing this, because it's kind of crossed my mind, is that, you know, all these kind of circuit vent video devices from the kind of well-known folk you see about, they're fairly pricey usually, at least if you go for some of the more well-known ones. And to be honest, at times you can be like, wow, when you compare the cost of those devices to, you know, any kind of other electronic device that you might come across when you're making music or whatever, they can seem very expensive. However, when you kind of do something like this and you realise the amount of, you know, knowledge and skill and time and patience and everything that goes in to doing this kind of thing, it really is quite impressive, especially when folks are doing, you know, the full paint jobs and all that kind of thing. So skipping ahead a wee bit in the interest of time, I tested out all the buttons and switches, which is a bit of a tricky thing to do with circuit bent devices, because sometimes the buttons or switches or whatever don't actually produce an effect or any kind of, you know, visual confirmation that they're working unless other buttons are also engaged. So it took a wee bit of testing. However, they all seem to actually do something, which is, you know, the whole point of this. So that was good. I then went on to address the issue of the audio PCB, because obviously I can't fit that in the case anymore, as I'd explained earlier. Now, I cut the PCB with a hacksaw, and if you've never done this before, let me tell you, it was awful. I don't know, I guess you're not meant to do it because it produced a lot of heat and this awful smell, so I'm pretty sure I've poisoned myself. But either way, I managed to get it off kind of, you know, semi-cleanly, I guess. However, when I went to put the case back together, I realised that actually, because I'd cut this bit of the PCB, you know, so that it could sit in the front and the switches would still look like they were there, there was no way to actually affix this onto the front of the case. It kind of was secured using the other part of the PCB at the back. So that's a bit of a shame, because it means that now there's holes in the case at the front, but that's okay, that's not the end of the world. There's lots of things imperfect about this build already, but yeah, I wouldn't recommend hacksaw PCB, definitely not good. The next part of the process, of course, was to get the case all closed up together, and then you discover that you've got a whole bunch of screws that you don't really know where they go. And yeah, I'm sure if you're doing this kind of properly or rationally or logically, or you're maybe like a sensible human being, you would mark all the screws out when you take them out. However, that's not my cavalier way of doing things, so if the screws are back in, who knows if they're in the right hole or not. The case came together with no real issue, and this is one of the good things about this particular unit, is it's been really easy to work with outside of my mistake with the audio PCB, of course. Now then, the favourite part of mine is installing the knobs on the top, and I now leave that until the end, because I've found in the past that if you put the knobs on before everything is totally done, then something else will go wrong and then you'll have to unscrew them all. So it's a bit of a superstitious thing now. But they're all on and it all seems to be working all right. So I'm going to not do anything just now because it's late and I've spent far too much time doing this today. But tomorrow I'm going to continue this video, and it doesn't really matter to you because you're watching it, so you'll see it in a second. But I just want to explain so that when you see me wearing different clothes and looking much more awake and hopefully happier, then you'll know why. It's not just some kind of, I don't know, you get the idea. Through the magic of YouTube, it is now the next day. I've tidied up my studio, I've kind of tightened everything up a wee bit here, and I've cleared some space so that I can show you how this actually works and explain kind of what's going on. As you might notice, I had a bit of a breakdown last night, an existential crisis where I decided to shave off half my beard. And this is what happens when I'm left alone with my own thoughts for too long. So I could have probably done that another time, you know, not in the middle of filming a video, but there you go. Anyway, I'll show you the kind of layout or the explanation of my thought process behind doing this, because there was actually some thought to it at least, and it's probably worth documenting or explaining that. Now, I've got 8 different knobs on the top here, and then I've got 8 different latching switches, and then I've got 6 different momentary switches on the left. I had hoped, or I had thought, that this would be my most kind of extravagant bending project yet, in the sense that this would have the most kind of you know, different points that you can interact with. However, I discovered that actually, if I reach down here, this one here, which I guess I can show you up on that screen. I circuit bent this a wee while ago. It's a Vivanco VCR video mixer, and I hadn't actually done a video on that yet. I will do that soon. But it turns out that it's got the exact same number of bend points as this. So I failed, and I'll need to aim higher next time if I want to go a bit further. Anyway, with this one, to explain what's going on, sometimes when you're doing a circuit bend like this, what you'll do is find some good points and connect them all up kind of together so they interact. But I didn't really want to do that with this one. I wanted to find individual bend points or individual pairs of bend points so that I could always kind of get back to the original picture, because that isn't always easy to do if you start really kind of mixing everything in. So that's kind of the idea behind this. If you're not sure what I'm referring to, essentially each one of these potentiometers has got its own unique 2 points on the circuit board that are connected together. So for example, this has got 2 separate points, this knob's got 2 separate points, etc. And to a large extent that's the same thing with these latching switches over here. They both connect unique points on the circuit board. So none of these really interact with each other in terms of the circuit bend. If they do interact, it's because of the way they're routed together in the PCB. Now, normally that would mean you don't get quite as interesting effects, but I found that on this device it actually worked quite well anyway. Now, the other thing is that these points here, these kind of momentary push switches, I put them in because they're fun to play about with, and I also didn't want to put in audio reactivity, so I thought if I put in some of these buttons then it'll let me play along in time with music or whatever. Now these ones are a bit of a wild card because these do actually connect up different knobs or different switches together. So for example, one of these or a few of these might connect up this knob with this knob, or at least the solder points in there. So these kind of introduce an element of randomness and kind of insanity that hopefully I can come back from. There is also one of these that is connected to a switch here. So if the switch is on, that can't activate basically. Now, I have thought about trying to lay things out in a logical way so that you know which switch corresponds to which kind of push button switch and all that, but that's kind of another layer of things that I don't really want to, you know, contend with at the moment. And also I think there is a joy in not knowing what the fuck is going on, I guess, when it comes to these kinds of projects. Before I go ahead, I've got this wee car reversal camera up here that I'm recording on. You should know that much like everything in life, what you give into this thing radically alters the outcome that you get. So because I'm using quite a muted camera here, there's not kind of bold colours or anything on this, you know, tiny £3 car reversal camera. That means that we're unlikely to get the same kind of huge bold colours that we might get if we were running some really bright, vivid video, for example. The reason I'm kind of bringing that up is because everything that you do will have an impact on the video you get out in the end. And this also applies to the switches and the knobs on the front here. So the way this thing actually works down here is that we've got two kind of separate sections. One is the video enhancer section, I guess, and it's got controls for detail, brightness, contrast, and also color, which is saturation. And then we've got the individual color channel adjustments, which are separate, and you can change the RGB values. Now both of these can either be activated or deactivated, and at the moment I've got them completely deactivated, and this should mean that the bends or the effects we get as a result of the bends are going to be quite different, and they're probably usually quite muted without these different enhancements on, because obviously this part of the circuit is much more interesting. Now I'll show you, if I start to bring up, change some of the knobs, the results here are fairly, you know, they're interesting, but they're not as interesting as we might want from a color processor. It's very kind of glitchy, you know, kind of shadows and lack of clarity, and you know, image kind of skew and offset. There are some weird color shifts going on up there that you can get to. Well, it looks alright, eh? Would I look good with a green beard? Maybe not. Anyway, this is the kind of thing you can expect without the color enhancer circuit active, right? It's just fairly kind of pedestrian. Now, if I turn everything off again so you can see the picture, the switches in their down position, by the way, are all off. When they're up, they're on. So if I turn on the color enhancement and also the color, the picture enhancement and the color processing, you'll see immediately probably the image will change. Now you can see there's a wee bit of a color cast there. I'll try and get it back to a wee bit normal. And if I put on the picture processing, nothing happens at the moment. I can adjust brightness, contrast, and all that good stuff. However, let's try turning some things on. Now, this knob in particular immediately gives us some interesting color bars, which react quite strongly to the different RGB channels in here. So we can get some really odd kind of, it's almost like an oscillator effect. And I'm wondering if somebody smarter than me would be able to do something like injecting a different kind of time pulse, or maybe put an LFO into there or something. I don't know. But you can see how with the color processor section activated, you start to get really quite unusual effects. Yeah. And if, you know, as with all these devices, there's like a very thin line between the effect you want and just chaos. So like, there you go. Yeah. So that gives you the gist. This is kind of how this operates. So what I'm going to do is, rather than sit here and twiddle the knobs and flick about the switches and things whilst you know, you listen to my boring voice, I'm just going to experiment with some of it, because I've not really fully played about with this device on its own yet, and I'll put it to some music or something, and you can see the kind of effects you would get if you're re-recording the screen and stuff. Anyway, for now, thanks for watching. Enjoy the visual stuff. Hopefully it's interesting. See you later.